Hi, listeners and viewers. Welcome to Mind Your Mind, Season 5, Episode 7. Can you believe it, ladies? So we're mixing it up a little bit because we have some really important conversations to have, right? About child well-being and, most importantly, protecting our most vulnerable residents, those children. So we're going to be having a conversation about PCA and CAP. Can we throw any more acronyms in there? But seriously, it is so important that we all see ourselves in a role of protecting children and strengthening families in our community. So Kaitlyn Ball, Director of Strategic Initiatives and Partnerships with the Cobb Collaborative, and Lesleigh Sanders, our Mental Health Program Coordinator, are joining me today for this important conversations. So ladies, I'm going to let you flip a coin, talk to us about PCA and what is it?
Sure. So I'll take it. Yes. So PCA is now, it was formerly Prevent Child Abuse, but it is now Positive Childhood Alliance. Okay. And that shift is very recent. It launched March 1st, and so they're well into kind of adjusting to this new shift, but really it's focusing on those positive attributes of a childhood and how that prevents child abuse and neglect. So really shifting the narrative from the more negative, right, that we kind of view child abuse as, to how can positive factors in a childhood's life prevent child abuse. So.
And Lesleigh, is Georgia alone in doing this, or is this part of a bigger movement?
We are not alone. So North Carolina was the first PCA to really bring this shift, and hopefully it just embeds the country and we become more unified under Positive Childhood Alliance, really focusing on the strengths, the characteristics that families and children can be provided with protective factors.
Yeah.
So.
And I'm sorry, go right ahead.
I was just going to say, PCA is a national model, so every state really is behind the work of PCA, but there are statewide coalitions and regional coalitions that help really drive the work within our direct communities. So we're the lead council for PCA Cobb County, so we really get to convene those stakeholders within our community to really address the issues and the needs of our areas. Every area looks a little bit different, but that's why we have these kind of statewide and regional coalitions too, to break down some of the larger all-encompassing work that PCA does, really just anything that we do to prevent child maltreatment and abuse and neglect in any ways that we can.
And thank you for saying that, Kaitlyn. In no way do we want to discount or ignore the fact that, sadly and unfortunately, child maltreatment does happen in our community. But we are switching from that surveillance mode to support mode. Yes. As Jennifer Stein, the president of PCA Georgia, says, that anything that we do to strengthen and support families helps to prevent child abuse. So, Kaitlyn, you mentioned a couple of things, and I want to pick up on those. Surrounding our families and our youth, particularly with resources and supports. I think that's commonly known as protective factors. So can you expound a little bit on what do we mean when we talk about protective factors?
Yeah, so with protective factors, those kind of are built upon ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences is what we'll call them, and those are those kind of like those abuse, neglect, that maltreatment that we might experience, or traumas that we might experience in childhood, whereas PACEs is kind of what we call them too, or protective factors. Those are things that we can wrap around families and individuals to mitigate the impacts of adverse childhood experience in ACEs, and those can look like a lot of different things for communities, but really we like to pull from the framework, the HOPE framework, which was developed by Tufts University. There's a lot of research around those positive experiences, and they really lump them into 4 categories. So it's going to be nurturing relationships, safe, stable, and equitable environments, opportunities for social and civic engagement, and emotional growth. So each of those pillars really help provide those protective factors in the community, whether it's as an individual in a family unit or more system-wide as our communities. Those pillars are really there to nurture and mitigate some of the negative things that can happen to us in life and in our communities.
Yeah. So the HOPE framework sounds like a way to kind of actualize the concept of protective factors. Like these are things that you can do to introduce. Is that, am I?
Yeah,
on the right track there?
putting those concepts into action. So there are those very tangible things that we can do, whether that's, understanding the role of the public libraries in our community and how they provide opportunities for engagement and play, but also connection, and building safe, emotional growth and relationships with one another in the community, access to resources. So all of those things really build upon one another.
Yeah.
And we know too that just one healthy relationship in a child's life can really play a big factor in prevention, really supporting the family as well. So even outside sources that you wouldn't tend to think are supportive factors for a family, like a coach or a teacher, can really play a big shift in the narrative there.
That's so important. That's why we always lift up the work of Marietta Mentoring for Leadership, Marietta Yells, Cobb Mentoring Matters, all these wonderful organizations that provide opportunities for those deep connections and relationships with a nurturing, trusted adult that may be outside of the biological family. So, Lesleigh, Kaitlyn has mentioned the importance of social connections and community support. Can you just connect the dots for us and tell us how those things really do contribute to preventing child abuse?
Yes, so kind of playing into mental health a little bit. We know that's one of our initiatives here, but we know that when people experience stress, that impacts the rest of their life. So especially if they are a parent and they have children at home, they're experiencing many different stressors, whether that be financially, health problems, things like that, that can really impact the family unit and can reduce or bring more risk for abuse and neglect, even just an unstable environment. So really when we talk about protective factors and the different ways that we can do that, that really plays a big factor of prevention. So that outside sources, as Kaitlyn mentioned, that really can provide the strength, the support, the resources that a family needs, not just the parent, but the whole family unit. It can really play that big factor.
And I hope you'll both agree with me. I think it's important to recognize the fact or acknowledge the fact that child maltreatment can take place across all socioeconomic and zip codes. The stresses might be different, might look a little bit different or be caused by external things, but they, unfortunately, child maltreatment and the need to keep families strong and stable and thriving exist across every neighborhood in our community, right?
Yeah, everyone experiences stress. As we say in one of our trainings, CREM, Community Resiliency Model, we all are humans and we all have a nervous system and we all get impacted by stress. And so that really impacts other things in our life, how we interact with other people, our relationships, how we're parenting, which we know that if we're not doing anything about it, if we're not able to get access to care, to treatment, then we're not able to prevent those things as much.
Yeah. I share this in trainings, and just a moment of transparency here for our listeners. I readily admit that when I get stressed out usually about work or something like that, what do? I take it out on the people who are closest to me, who have done nothing to contribute to that. And if I'm doing that, imagine just all the other scenarios that can take place in our community. So now, we don't want to give parents and caregivers a hall pass, right? We want to talk about their responsibility to build resilience within themselves. And so how can parents work to build their resilience as their child's first and most important teacher, just so that that they can be there for their children and their families? And how can we as community members help these caregivers in their role?
Yeah, I think for parents in the role of that preventing child maltreatment and things, I think, now one, I'm not a parent, so I can only speak from, understanding the models, the research, and what everything is telling us. But, fundamentally as human beings, if we don't have our basic needs met, it's really hard for us to function critically, think rationally, make good decisions for ourselves. So I think part of it comes from one, acknowledging maybe our own needs and maybe past traumas or stressors as an adult, not being afraid to ask for help and lean on supports when it's needed. But sometimes that's really challenging, and just recognizing our own challenges as individuals can help us heal maybe some of the past traumas we have, especially if we grew up in an environment where there was abuse or neglect, and generational trauma, tends to repeat itself. So sometimes that acknowledgement and that really feeds into that emotional growth, right? That pillar of how do I maybe work through some of the things that I'm still working through or maybe don't realize are affecting me as an adult. I think we had a really great panel discussion and keynote presentation during our Resilience Summit, and one of the things that stayed with me was this quote of, a dysregulated adult cannot regulate a dysregulated child. Yes. And that to me was like the biggest takeaway, because we have to understand too, we've got to put that oxygen mask up on ourselves first before we can teach our own children, emotional regulation skills and things like that. So part of it is, one, I think self-regulation is a big key in building resilience, because one, it helps us turn our thinking brain back online. So we can make a good decision. We can call for help if we need it. We can lean on a resource. But if we're kind of stuck in this like fight or flight mode where we're, don't have our needs met all the time, and we're kind of floating from place to place or whatever that may be, we're not always thinking ahead or critically about those things. So I think a big part of resilience is that self-awareness, that emotional regulation, and that allows for growth. And then if you need to go see a therapist to work through some and break some of those cycles, you can. Yeah. But I think that's really where it starts.
Right. And I think too, if parents are able to seek that support for themselves and model that behavior of growing their own resilience, it only helps out the family unit more now that children can feel safe and stable and emotionally safe as well, because that plays a huge part in prevention later down in the road when you have teenagers maybe, and there's all sorts of stressors. Right. So it definitely plays a big role in that.
Yeah. And I think what you said too about modeling is so important, because again, we're human beings. We're not perfect humans, and we're not going to handle everything the best all the time. But even just that acknowledgement of, okay, maybe I handled this situation. Maybe I did get upset. I was in this state of mind where there were a lot of things going on, and I yelled at my child. But I can take that moment of pause afterwards, come back and model that healthy behavior of, hey, let's talk about this. I was upset. I did maybe yell at you in that moment, and I'm sorry. I know that hurt your feelings, and this is what I was going through. And just taking that time to reconcile afterwards, that's a big piece of that growth as well, and modeling how do we come to resolutions, how do we work past this and work through it, so it doesn't kind of build or fester or whatever it may be.
Right. So important. As I have often said, in the moment you make the best decision that you can with the resources and the information that you have, but sometimes your emotions, you can kind of get hijacked and you forget about all those tools and resources. So as you said, becoming self-aware and reflecting, and then modeling in front of your family members. So Kaitlyn, you had mentioned possibly therapy, might be an answer or a resource for some people. And Lesleigh, as our mental health program coordinator, I'll ask you, How does access to mental health resources for these parents and caregivers, and really any child-facing adult in our community, how do those reduce the risk of abuse and other forms of child maltreatment?
Yes. So like Kaitlyn mentioned too, mental health, that plays a huge part in how a parent can grow resilience in themselves and their families, which then, prevents that child abuse and neglect. But as well, there has to be that outside source that we sometimes seek if we don't have the capacity to do that, if we don't have the resources to do that. So having access to those external supports and treatments if we need them can play a big factor, because then we are able to equip ourselves with the skills and our tool belt of skills, if you will, to be able to manage those stressors. We're able to give back for ourselves and what we need, especially if we are parents. I'm not a parent myself either, but I can imagine that having
Just
that time
wait, just wait.
yeah. Right. But yeah, having that time and that source for yourself that you're able to pour back into what your needs are just for a little bit really can carry you a long way in your parenting, in your relationships with others, in your family home. And I know that, in this state, especially, access to mental health care is very low. We're still 49th, right?
48th maybe, but
yes.
way low, yes.
It's definitely not easy, but there are definitely supports out there if we are in those situations that we can have. So I would say overall, just having the ability to foster that resilience within ourselves can then impact how we're parenting, which then reduces the risk that we might have of lashing out on our child and not being able to control our emotions, right?
Yeah.
So.
And I think that there are other resources that can help or supplement therapy. That might be parent support groups. There might be some sort of affinity group, just coming together with others and helping you realize, oh, I am not all alone in this journey is so important, right?
Yeah, and that's what I was going to share as well, too, because I think there still is a lot of stigma around therapy, especially in various cultural communities. And
Seeking out a therapist.
And even having representation in therapy is, a challenge, especially in the state of Georgia, but I think those, even community groups, maybe you're a part of a church that has a parent group that meets together. Maybe you're a part of a civic group that, you can connect with people and they can connect you with other resources, whether it's therapy, whether it's a workshop you can go through or something like that, even journaling tools, things like that. And I will say for abuse and neglect and with traumas and adverse childhood experiences, as an adult, if you've experienced a lot of those, even we talk about it in some of our trainings, our mental health work, but when we think about the biology of how the brain is even functioning, when we're experiencing a lot of traumas, if we're kind of stuck in that fight or flight, it does impact the way our brain is developing, the way our brain is functioning. And so even sometimes the memories that we have don't fully get transcribed properly because of the activation of the kind of emotional brain that interferes with the memory part of our brain. And so understanding too that, as an adult, if I myself experience a lot of ACEs, I might need to work through that more deeply than just a resource or just going through, journaling and things like that. Where that might require more extensive therapy, like something like EMDR therapy, where it helps you reprocess some of those things so you don't repeat those cycles or so, because oftentimes, we can be triggered by things that we're not even fully aware of. Where is this coming from? Why am I responding this way? Why am I getting this upset when my kid is doing this thing and it's not even that big of a deal, but for some reason I'm triggered by it. Those are more deeply rooted things, especially when we're talking about generational traumas and things like that. So breaking those cycles sometimes does require a little more extensive therapy, but sometimes it doesn't. And each of our own resilience is very individual to us.
Yes,
so I think acknowledging that too and recognizing where are we at ourselves can help us in the prevention too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lesleigh, I want to pick up on something that Kaitlyn mentioned about, sometimes therapy is the answer, working with a professional mental health person. So can you talk about how the access to mental health resources for parents, caregivers, any child-facing adult help to reduce the risk of child abuse and other forms of maltreatment?
Yes, of course. So Kaitlyn, mentioned that mental health plays quite a large factor in how we go about our lives, right? Everything gets impacted by it. So when we leave any challenges or stressors that we're experiencing, if we leave those unaddressed, it might bring about those risks in other areas of our lives. So our parenting, our home life, our family unit. So really access to those mental health services if we so need them, and treatment if we need that, can really provide that key factor that might just prevent a situation from escalating, right? So we can utilize those services to address any stressors or challenges or undiagnosed conditions that we might have that might be impacting our parenting and our relationships. And it allows us to equip ourselves with skills that help us manage our emotions. We talked about a dysregulated adult cannot regulate a child if they're dysregulated. So it just goes back to that of how can we better foster resilience within ourselves so that we can go back to our home life, go back to our parenting lives, and model that there, right? And I think that just being able to seek out that support, sometimes that's harder than others, right? We talked about how that, having access to mental health is not a given in this state. Unfortunately, we rank 49th, 48th still in access to mental health services. So just being able to become aware that you need that for yourself, because we all do, right? We all need that for ourselves to pour back into ourselves, and that can really shift the narrative and how we're parenting, which can then prevent child abuse.
So that outside source of support without the emotional baggage of I'm doing life with you, or we have this long history,
unbiased,
that can really help a person kind of process what they're going through currently, and then kind of reframe where they are and their relationship. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes. And I think too, I've heard this phrase that it takes a village. And sometimes, we don't have a village, but we can seek out those sources that can act as our village of support. And therapy services or support groups can be a great way to do that, to seek that support, and to give ourselves a moment that we might need, because we can't pour from a cup that's really empty. Right? Exactly. It has to be overflowing with that resilience. So.
And like you said, I think, it doesn't have to just be therapy necessarily, but any kind of, groups that we're a part of that can help even connect us to resources, give us tools to equip ourselves so we can better manage and handle stress. So maybe it's a journaling workshop that we participate in, or a vision board workshop, or something like that.
Trauma-informed training.
Exactly. Or one of our
it's not a therapy service, but
yes. And I will say too that if we're really looking at traumas and preventing traumas, especially generational trauma, sometimes people may require more extensive therapy that helps them work through their own adversities that they've gone through. I think we often can push those things aside, especially if we're caring for others. We don't always care for ourselves first, and we're kind of just going through surviving. But if we have been through our own traumas and experiences, that can really impact the way our brains are functioning and responding, even during that development phase, throughout childhood, can really impact the way that our brain is functioning. So maybe that emotional brain that is really reactive and responsive, that's not our critical thinking brain, has exercised that muscle a lot through childhood. So that is what is going to respond when we're in a moment, even even the way that, our kind of memory brain doesn't always work when that emotional brain is on. So even kind of recognizing that we may be triggered by things that we're not fully aware of, or like, why am I responding this way to my child when they're clearly just upset because they didn't get to go to the little activity after school that they wanted to go to. So, but as that adult, how am I recognizing maybe my own triggers and stuff, or recognizing even I don't know where this is coming from, so maybe I do need a little bit more support, like an EMDR therapist or something, where they can help reprocess some memories and things that you as an adult went through, so you can kind of break those cycles of that generational trauma instead of letting it pass on and pass on and pass on.
Yeah.
I think working in the child welfare field myself, I saw just how relevant it is, or I'm forgetting the word. Just how
Pervasive?
yes, it is, where when a child enters care, you really see that sometimes the parent really does care and love the child,
Sure.
but they don't have the support systems in place. They don't have the resources in place to be able to seek support, and so those unaddressed challenges just continue to build up until something happens, and that's unfortunately just the case with so many.
Sometimes you don't know what you don't know. And
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So. Let's get kind of down to nuts and bolts. What are some ways that we can build safe, stable, and nurturing relationships with children? What can the adults in the room do? Share some examples.
Yeah, I think for adults in care, I think one thing is that children want to feel heard and listened to. So I think listening, empathizing with your child is a big way to create connection between the two. And that can be challenging sometimes too, but I think sometimes that really requires us as adults to be present. We can very much be stuck in our head with that long to-do list we have, or all these what ifs and scenarios, but just taking a time, maybe being present, putting your phone down, and really giving undivided attention to your child can really create that space where they feel like they can speak to you and have you hear them and listening to what is going on, so then you can better maybe address their issues or concerns or needs as a parent. So.
Right.
Anything else to add to that, Leslie?
I would say along the same lines of having those moments of validation and listening, but also those moments of connection and building the healthy relationship with their child. So, and it goes right back to mental health. If our mental health is struggling, we're going to have less of a capacity to be able to have those intentional connection moments, right? Not just with our kids, but with our spouse, with our partner, with our families. So really trying to, even if it's just reading those stories at bedtime and really making sure that we're both present in this moment, right? Or your morning routine, making 5 minutes extra to share about good things you have for the day. Really trying to capitalize on those times that you can be intentional. And it can look small and it can look different for everybody too, depending on your lifestyle.
I think sometimes people are so surprised that it's really those small moments that, when added together, build safe, stable, and nurturing relationships. So, and I'll just add one other thing. Sometimes it's maybe just changing a phrase. If you have a child complaining or really upset about something, and as you as a parent think, oh, this is not a big deal. Why are you all? But instead of saying that, like, I understand this is hard for you, or I understand that is upsetting. Can we talk a little bit more about that, instead of just like saying, oh, there's nothing to get upset about. Like, let's move on. Because to your point, Kaitlyn, then the child feels like he or she has not been heard, and their feelings are not valid. And every feeling is valid, because for that child, it is true and it is real. In that moment.
For children too, they're just learning how to deal with all the emotions.
To label emotions.
Exactly. To understand, what is this that I'm feeling? Why am I upset? Where is this coming from? And all of those things. So sometimes as adults we can look at things with an adult lens and be like, well, this isn't a big deal. But thinking back to a child lens too, of like, this may be the first time I've ever experienced this situation before, and it's totally new to me, and it's scary, and I might be responding in the appropriate way for someone who's never been through something before in that moment, experiencing that. But as an adult, you're like, well, that's not a big deal, stop crying. And it's like, well, let's think about just reframing our lens a little bit.
I think too, it goes back to, again, the emotional emotional intelligence of a parent. You can only parent so far and understand how your child is experiencing something if you yourself have that range of emotions. So having that resilience within yourself and emotional regulation skills allows you to then be able to look at that situation that your child is having and be like, well, okay, what do we need here? There's a phrase that I've heard that the child's not giving you a hard time, they're having a hard time. So there's something happening, and it's up to us as the parent, right? Or I say us, but as the adult, right? To be able to check in with ourselves so that we can understand the emotions behind that and help the situation heal instead of escalate into more chaos, right?
And I will say the role of, positive and healthy relationships is not just for parents and caregivers. It is for all of us.
Community members,
Right. Whether you're facing a child in your line of work, whether you're an educator or work in the community, or even just, I'm an aunt. And so I have little ones in my life that I get to influence and have a role in their lives. And so even sometimes where maybe a child doesn't have a stable home environment and that adult doesn't have the capacity because they're, don't have their needs met or aren't connected to the right resources. But even for that child, maybe that mentor, maybe that teacher, I think we can all maybe remember someone that wasn't our caregiver that made a big impact on our lives. And I think we never know when we will be that one adult for a child. And I think that's where all of us have that kind of collective effort in preventing child abuse, that it's not just for people that are working with children. It's not just for parents and caregivers, but it's really this whole community where we can, recognize signs of child abuse or neglect, or, just provide opportunities for engagement for children in our lives, or just being that one adult that someone can listen to or be that, voice to.
Yes. To Leslie's point, it takes a village, and often everyone is better off for that village approach. So, well, we're having this conversation because the calendar has shifted to April 2025, hard to believe, which is Child Abuse Prevention Month. So let's inform our viewers and our listeners how they can get involved. Beyond wearing blue, but I want to thank you both for wearing blue today, which is that color. So again, who wants to start with the many ways to get involved?
Sure, I'll go ahead. So again, wear blue. But also pinwheels are a great way to kind of symbolize what PCA is all about, which is that positive childhood, really going back to childlike joy and the stability that we have with that. The theme of this year's April Child Abuse Prevention Month is Powered by Hope, Strength by Prevention. Strengthened by Prevention. So I think really capitalizing on that message of looking at it from a hopeful lens and what can we do, what strengths do we have. So whether you're just a community member, there's ways to get involved there by attending community events. We have a few this month that we can share. Wearing that blue, maybe planting your own pinwheel garden to symbolize that you support the overall message with PCA. So there's definitely so many ways for a community member to get involved. But if it's an organization, that's there's a little deeper there. So.
And we're going to try to make it as easy as possible for our community members to join us. Kaitlyn, you want to talk about how people can find us and what they're looking for, like on our website and other communication tools?
Yeah, we do post all of our happenings and our events calendar through our newsletter. So definitely go to our website, cobbcollaborative.org, and you can subscribe to our newsletter. It comes out every 2 weeks, and you get updates on the latest events that are happening, not just from us, but through our partners and members too, who are also invested in this work. You can check out the events calendar that's on our website. We have a strategy team meeting this month, actually on April 16th. We have the PCA strategy team meeting, bringing together various stakeholders to really talk deeper about these issues and how we all have this collective responsibility in moving the needle and prevention.
Yeah. And the PCA mascot will be there.
Yes.
Blue.
It's blue. Yes, yes. There's a teaser. If you all want to come see Blue, you've got to join us on April 16th.
You can also, while you're on our events calendar, check out a mandated reporter training. Those are great for, especially if you're child facing, but really any adults to go through to recognize the signs and what you can do to play a role in that. So we've got tons of that. And even those opportunities for emotional growth. We have a lot of those trauma-informed mental health trainings that community members can take advantage of. We can also come to your group to offer those, teaching those self-regulation skills so we can better help ourselves in our communities. So those are just a few of the things you can really take advantage of and find out on our website and through our newsletter. Also go to our social media pages where you may see clips of this or more photos of those pinwheel gardens that we're putting up around the community, so you can go and see them in person and then maybe recreate them for yourself.
Yeah, we would love that. We would love to see Cobb blanketed in pinwheels.
Yes, in blue, not green.
Yes. Because that means that we've kind of reached a tipping point, if you will, where everybody understands their role to strengthen and support families, and how that ultimately prevents child maltreatment. And we want all children to live in thriving families, and families to live in robust communities that have opportunities for everyone, so that everyone can live their life of self-determination ultimately, right? So, all right. Well, it's been a pleasure, both of you, to have this conversation and to highlight and lift up some of the reasons behind why we are doing what we do and how community members can be involved. And listeners, we want to thank you for not only listening, but also viewing our conversation today. Be sure to like us on our podcast. That helps other people find us. Leave us a review, and plan to join us next time as we continue to explore critical and important issues that impact our community. Until next time, please stay well, be kind, and remember, there is no health without mental health.